Welcome to the Creative Condition Podcast, the show where I, Ben Talon, illustrator and writer, invite people from the creative industry and far beyond to share their story of creativity. Both the nature and the nurture, the chaos and the calm. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, something I'm increasingly fascinated by and so often misunderstood. So little by little, I hope to build an archive of fascinating stories, experiences and tips to help you maximise yours. The show is supported by Illustration X. Go and take a look at their incredible global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, go and listen to Dirty Freud over on Spotify and all good music platforms now. Today I'm joined by John Burton, co-founder of Pretty Clever Studio based in Bournemouth, who recently got their B Corp accreditation badge. Very exciting times for the agency. They've got big plans moving forward to keep doing the amazing work they're doing in what John refers to as the do-good space. And that's something we're going to talk about, where that ambition came from, how he got there. It's another case of a wonderful winding path that I think there's a lot to learn from. We're going to get into that with an agency that describe themselves as smart, caring, ethical folks who are keen to make a positive impact on the world. I'm going to ask John a big question at the end of the show about hope, about optimism, about how much of that we have just now. Hello and welcome to the show. I am Ben Talon, your host of The Creative Condition. Welcome back. I am sweating. I have got such a bead on. It's not even funny anymore. Oh dear, I don't know how you guys feel. I find it very hard on a number of levels. I find this hard physically, mentally and emotionally, sadly, because of what it means and the climate crisis and the way that we seem to just keep plodding along like nothing's wrong. And oh dear, I could talk about that all day, but I'm not gonna. We're gonna get into good work and about the difference that can make today with John Burton. How are you doing? What do you think of Kieran Lewis? I had a great time talking to Kieran. Like I mentioned, it being a long time in the making. Got great feedback on the show. He was a joy to chat to. And we're moving it forward from one person doing great work to an agency doing wonderful work. We've got Pretty Clever's John Burton on the show today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm going to ask John quite a big question at the end about hope and about optimism and about how he feels about the future, because when the sun's beating down on the studio like this in the afternoon and I'm sweating and it's just hard to get out of anything other than a very sluggish, minimal mindset, it can feel quite depressing and it can feel quite despairing. I'm a very sensitive person and I get affected, as I've mentioned many times, by the climate emergency and the lack of action and the lack of ability that I, like so many others, have to do what I would really love to do, which is just down tools on everything. Stop drawing, stop writing, turn around and face this monster, this existential threat. But that's not the system we live in, is it? We have to get on and we have to keep doing these. We have to keep ticking our day-to-day sheets to make money and to keep existing. And what's the end game? It's pretty terrifying. So that's why I wanted to talk to John about that today. But I'm happy to say we do have quite an uplifting chat with a person who has worked hard, taken some big personal and business risks to get to a place where they're working with the clients they want to be working with, who they feel are doing work that's additive to the world. It's doing great stuff with great people. It was an absolute joy. I drove over to Bournemouth to talk to John. I didn't need much of an excuse to get over and see the lovely beaches there, which is what I did. Had a nice lunchtime explore, photographing weird things, as you guys will know by now that I like to do. More about that in a minute. I just want to give a big thank you to the ongoing sponsor, founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now over at illustrationx.com or on social at We Are Illustration X. Great bunch of people representing a big bunch of global artists, illustrators, and as many specialists as you can imagine. Illustration X, of course, for a little while now, just like Pretty Clever, today's guest, have been certified B Corp. So just to clarify what that actually means, certified B corporations are leaders in the global movement for an inclusive, equitable and regenerative economy. Unlike other certifications for businesses, B Lab is unique in our ability to measure a company's elite social and environmental impact. So important stuff. B Corp certification is a designation that a business is meeting high standards of verified performance, accountability and transparency on factors from employee benefits and charitable giving to supply chain practices and input materials. As it mentions there, rigorous testing. So big ups to Illustration X for being exactly that. And we are going to get into that with John today. So yeah, we're getting into the good stuff today. So I had Katie Klenchensky from Smack Studios on the show recently. I had Kieran Lewis, a freelance designer who's doing incredible work with many people. We talked about the book Still Breathing, 100 Black Voices on Racism, and 100 Ways to Change the Narrative by HarperCollins. It's a magic book and I can't recommend it any higher. Very powerful, hard-hitting stuff presented very clearly, typographically and photographically by Kieran, who designed it. We get right into that. And Pretty Clever approached me not too long back and said they were fans of the show. Was there any room for a guest? Which doesn't happen, not nearly enough. I get hit up by PR people and every now and again I get a brave soul who goes, "Can I be on?" And the answer often is yes. If there's a good story there, if there's something that strikes a chord with where I'm going with the show, which ebbs and flows and changes all the time, then I'll do it. It makes my life easier. So get in touch if you've got some stuff you want to share. But this is how Pretty Clever describe themselves on their website, and I do implore you to go and have a look at their awesome work. We're smart, caring, ethical folks who are keen to make a positive impact on the world. That's why we want our business to be a force for good, improving the lives of our employees, people and their communities, and doing right by our planet. They've got a wonderful setup in a shared studio space. The energy was brilliant when I talked to John. I loved hearing his story. It's one of those inspiring winding paths as we often seem to have, because as I've been writing about extensively as I come up on the first draft of the Creative Condition book, creativity is an extension of us and we're changing all the time, and we have to live a lot of life before we really understand where we are, and then when we get there it changes. So you have to stay attuned to those feelings, and as Dan Kieran said in a previous episode, you have to do course correction. You have to check that you're still not on a course you set 20 years ago without seeing if the place you're going to is even there anymore. And I think it's really important. And it's a great story today with John about that stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. We're coming up on the big 200th episode, which I haven't yet decided who it's going to be. But coming up, we've got Jake 100 and Mac Ferrari, co-founders of Bike Storms. That's a powerful one. That's incredible. We've got Jen Grenneman, co-author with Andrea Solo of Sensitive, The Power of a Thoughtful Mind in an Overwhelming World. Big one. I would go as far as saying that a massive majority in the creative industry are sensitive people, and her book is incredible. Go and read it. It's about how sensitive is termed as this thing of weakness and toughen up and the toughness myth and all these things, but it's our greatest strength when we learn to manage the downside. And I mentioned the climate crisis at the top of the show. I've been doing a lot of work this summer because I had a real mental health dip, or at least for me, because I've been a relatively happy person. I've been very fortunate having my creativity as an outlet. So I've been doing a lot of work on understanding my brain and changing my thought processes so that even when things are bad, which they really are at the moment, we have to be a lot more alarmed about the climate crisis and stop what we're doing and turn and face it. That said, I'm getting a lot better at managing my mind and learning to be happy in the moment, even if things are bleak, and trying to just take small actions to make sure I'm engaged with the problem as much as I can be within this fucked up system that we live in, which is capitalism. You just have to hope that we reach a tipping point before the tipping point where we all turn around and go, right, enough is enough. You lot need to be with us or against us. And I'm talking about governments and big corporations. You need to get on board. This is a problem that's going to, affect every single one of us, if not a lot worse than affect. And we have to deal with it. I did take heart from today's conversation. I took heart from Kieran Lewis. I took heart from Katie Klenchensky. I've taken heart from every guest that's doing something they care about and leading with their own heart. So there is spirit. Creativity keeps me sane. It keeps my equilibrium. But I'm not going to prattle on for too much longer. Big thank you to Illustration X. Do check them out. If you get a chance, please do review, subscribe, and tell a friend about the show. It's a massive help. I do this in my own time. I spend a lot more time than I probably should on it because I'm passionate about creativity, and I'm determined to leave an archive that is accessible for anyone long into the future that will help get creativity to its righteous place at the top of our cultures and societies. So do us a favour, please. Leave us a good review if you like the show. Tell a friend. Review. The book's coming along, like I mentioned. The book is approaching the first draft. I'm very, very excited about it. I'm very proud. It's a body of work that has become a monster that I didn't plan for. That should be coming to you in early 2024. Hopefully, wink, wink, in time for Off Festival 2024. We'll get there. But without further ado, Pretty Clever's John Burton. Enjoy.
Childhood was working class family. So Dad was a carpenter, joiner, and then Mum worked various different jobs, from kind of Argos to office to post office. My dad spent quite a lot of time away, like working on different projects around the world and stuff. He had his own business for a while, and I remember that being quite a kind of tough period in the 80s when the recession hit and he kind of lost that. So that was kind of what I saw growing up. And then in terms of like family life, 2 sisters. So good kind of family unit, I guess. It wasn't a particularly, I look back now and I was probably shielded from a lot of stuff in terms of like financials and things like that. I think it was probably quite tough. My dad worked away, my mum worked full time. She had 3 kids to look after. We didn't have a car for a lot of that time, and I remember her kind of carrying shopping bag from the supermarket and like not being able to get the keys out of the handbag because the carry bags have like cut into the fingers, and it's kind of like, and it's stuff like that you don't really realise until you're kind of much older, and you think, actually, shit, that was quite tough.
Are you from these parts?
Yeah, so I was born in the Midlands, but then I moved here when I was 2. So I've never really known anything any different, like growing up. So I grew up down here. I've done various stints in London as an adult. So childhood was down here. Went through a fairly kind of standard schooling system. There was a thing that I listened to recently of yours where they were saying, if you looked at a child and asked them from the creative sector whether there was any kind of inkling that they'd be involved in that later on in life, there definitely was. I was always kind of drawing, and I was probably drawing things that kind of, I loved kind of anything kind of zombie, grotesque, Frankenstein kind of stuff. And I remember my mum saying to me once, like, as an adult, that at one time she was like, what is all this stuff that he's drawing? And I loved that, and I went through a kind of fairly standard schooling system. Academically, I think I probably found it quite tough, and now I kind of understand why I didn't really fit into that system as much, but then I didn't really understand why I didn't kind of fit into that system quite as well as maybe I should have done. Ended up going to a grammar school, like local grammar school, secondary school. The focus there was very much on academia and sport. They did have a kind of arts department that was, I guess, fairly newly refurbished, and a design department. But even that was kind of like a separate bolt onto the main building. It was almost like the architecture was apologising as well. And then the drama hall, which I didn't do, but some friends of mine did, was like hidden in the wooded bit, right? So it was almost kind of like it's, that's not what we're here for. So I went through that system and did kind of GCSEs and A levels. And
did it ever make did it ever make you feel stupid? I definitely felt stupid at school. I don't think in the way that I knew I would be dawdling in bottom sets or anything like that. But that's because I asked because I've been writing extensively about this for my next non-fiction book about creativity and education, and interviewing a lot of teachers and people in that arena. And I definitely, I wandered, felt quite lost at times in terms of identity. It wasn't until much later in design school and everything else that I started to realise I wasn't stupid. It's just that system wasn't conducive to perhaps our brains.
Yeah, I think because we went to a school that was, supposedly the more academic, you sit these exams at like 11, 12 years old, that then they're like, oh, you're smart, and that's not right. You and I both know that's not right. I was fairly middle of the road. I didn't need to try that hard to get through the schooling system. And that was partly because there was always a focus at home from my mum of how important like education was, and to get a good education. So you could kind of have a good life at the end of it. And I think that probably came from a little bit of a place of struggle, of personal struggle, where it was like, do you know what, I didn't do that, but you should do that because that's going to solve a lot of your problems as you go through life. So I kind of went through that system in the middle. I never really needed to work that hard. I passed the exams. I didn't excel, but then I didn't fail them either. It was kind of, I got fairly good grades in the grand scheme of things. I don't think I ever felt stupid, but I certainly kind of felt like some of the skill sets that I had were maybe undervalued or not nurtured. We did, at A-level, I did 5 A-levels, and one of them was we were forced to do, which was general studies, and none of the university applications took general studies as a kind of UCAS point system. And then I also studied at school, given the option, history of art, which was actually really well regarded by a lot of universities because it's like a history qualification. And we went to the school and we said, we're doing this in our own time, we're finding we're not really having enough time to kind of study this. Can we drop general studies, which kind of feels a bit like a waste of time, in order to do this history of art? And they were like, no. So, and it's just exactly where the kind of value led.
Yeah.
So I came out of that with A-levels, and then at that point, the kind of prior year or two, you start kind of choosing where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And I think there was stuff around graphic design that I was interested in kind of commercializing my ability to draw. That was kind of like, oh, you can draw and you can make money from it, and you can be a graphic designer. But that was, I remember going to a parents' evening and sitting down with my art teacher and my mum, and sitting down, and the general consensus was, and that was the time when kind of graphic design was really popular, it was a cool thing to do.
Yeah. And
that it was really competitive. So, do you want to do that? And so there was this kind of like, you probably don't want to do that because it's really competitive and you have to be really good. And it wasn't like you could be really good, but you've got to work really hard and you can do it. It was like, that's going to be difficult. Do you want to do that? So I ended up, I don't know why, I'm looking back on it, but maybe it's kind of, you see some kind of 90s glamorous TV shows. I ended up doing a law degree, starting it. Didn't even manage a year of it and hated it. Ended up kind of just all the way through my lectures just kind of doodling pictures of professors and things like that. And there were some friends I had that I was at Kingston Uni, and some friends doing the graphic design course there, and that's a great course. And they were doing, and I was just like, wow, what you're doing is amazing. But I dropped out, and then then I came back and did a foundation here at AUB, and that was great. But I think that I still wasn't in the right mindset. I wasn't mature enough to kind of really focus on what that meant for my future. So probably didn't do as well as I should have done at that, and then kind of fell out of that, and then just went into employment and didn't touch graphic design for a number of years.
Interesting. There's two things that jump out from that, and one of them is, I think there's sometimes there's no better way to know where you want to go loosely by tasting what the alternative is. So in your case, a law degree there. I remember working at the factory my dad worked at for many years between first and second year of uni, and it worked perfectly for my dad. We've got quite different brains, and I fed the family, knew the people there. It was good for him. For me, a brain that needs variation, anyways, ticking boxes all day and unloading Arctic lorries. I was appreciative of the money I made that summer, but I hated it in that regard. The monotony of it, which wasn't for me personally. every evening then the sketchbooks were out, and I came back with renewed vigour in my second year, having done exactly what you described. I didn't take it all as seriously. It wasn't at a place in my life where I was able to do that. And I think that's a really common thread. I think that a lot of us follow our passions or where our heart is. And it takes time for that to become something that you can really apply yourself to, because it's this big amorphous industry that we don't quite understand. So why would you? It's almost like you're doing this thing that you're doing for pleasure in your spare time. So it's almost a rite of passage, I think. How long did that spell go on for, and what happened in between?
So I guess it came to about mid-20s. I got a grip on my life. The prior years before that, the kind of the 5 years before that, were doing various different jobs that I just didn't like. I did like mortgage advisor, credit controller, like various different university admissions, like lots of different kind of roles that just weren't me. And it is repetition. You go to work and it's kind of like, and sales stuff as well. I mean, sales jobs are, you go to work every day and this is your target. It's often quite unachievable, but if you hit it, they raise it. And it's always, you're almost kind of clawing at that constant, like, oh, I'm not good enough. And every day you're going in kind of with that reinforcement of like unrealistic goals. And it's not good for the soul, I don't think, or your brain. So I did that, ended up in quite a large FMCG company as their credit controller, and then had a Jerry Maguire thing one day where I was kind of like, fuck this, I'm never doing something I don't like ever again. Left, and then I've been doing some graphic design stuff on the side, like as a hobby. My gran had passed away, and my mum was like, she didn't really leave you anything, but we're selling her house and there's a little bit of money. I know that you've always had your eye on a Mac computer, and I'd been working on kind of like the cheapest, dirtiest computer there was. And so she bought me a Mac, and then I just spent all my spare time just like trying to learn what I could learn about the industry, teach me. I didn't really think I needed to learn about kind of creativity. I just thought I needed to learn how to use these packages. And I've been doing some stuff on the side. And there's one moment that I always talk about where I had some friends in a band, and then I got the artwork spec through, and I was like, what the fuck is bleed? What am I doing? And I was phoning these printers going, can you tell me how to set this up? And they were just, you could tell on the other end of the phone, they were just like, who's this idiot? Yeah. And so I did that for a while, kind of part-time on the side, and then I had other kind of jobs, and it didn't really pay any bills. And then I had a really good friend of mine who had a job in a local design studio down here, and he got me some kind of an in through the door to kind of work for free, and then that turned into kind of cheap, and then it kind of went from there, and I didn't look back.
So what's the pretty clever story then?
So Pretty Clever is, we specialise in the for good space. We are about 2 weeks into being B Corp certified. We're the first agency in Dorset to do that, as far as I'm aware. Thanks. That's a big milestone for us, and it took a long time. I set that up in 2019. I worked in London until 2012, moved back here. Always had an idea that I wanted to run my own studio. I've always been quite vocal about that. Came back, skirted around the idea, launched a kind of, worked as a sole trader, but kind of masqueraded as an agency, as a lot of people do when they start out. And traded under a different name. And that went on for kind of a number of years. In the background, and I was kind of, it was finger in the air stuff as like, who wants work? And like maybe a bit of recommendation, no real planning around it. Never run a business, didn't really know what I was doing. And then that went on for a number of years. And the money was all right. It was comfortable, and I was doing what I always wanted to do, that I thought was kind of a hobby. And then in the background, while that was going on, I was going through a period of, myself and my wife have always kind of been interested in, what happens if we take this away? Do we really need this? So she does that on certain things. So it was like, one time she was like, I'm just going to put a TV away for a month and see if we need the TV.
Yeah.
And, we don't need the TV. We've got a TV again, but we don't need it.
Yeah.
And I think stuff like that's really interesting to do, to kind of like go to check in every now and then and kind of go, do I need this? Do I need that? And that was part of a bigger thing that I think we were both going through, of kind of where do we sit in the world? What do we need? What's our impact on the planet? What can we do? We went vegan for a long time and kind of experimented with like taking different kind of foods out. Do we need that? And so that kind of changed us, I think, ethically. I'd worked on a couple of projects that were what I now call in the for good space. A couple of charities and research companies and stuff like that. And I'd really enjoyed that work. And I'd also found they were kind of not doing a disservice to any other industry, but they were actually really nice people to work with. It's kind of like, they were setting out to achieve something really good. And then probably kind of 2017, 2018 maybe, I was looking at capitalism in a different way and kind of thinking, overconsumption, and I'm kind of selling all this stuff, and that's my job, but I really love it. Where does that kind of sit with me morally? And then I was on a website of a clothing brand called Cotopaxi, and I saw a thing at the bottom of their website, it's a B Corp badge, and I'm always kind of clicking around different stuff. I clicked on it to find out what it was, and it was like all these kind of for good, for profit organisations, kind of going, you can use your business to do good. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So it was about 2018, and then 2019, I actually thought, right, I'm not getting any younger, I need to do it now, otherwise it's never going to happen. So I'm going to set up a proper company, I'm going to pay myself a salary rather than kind of, just do it as a sole trader. Kate who's my wife, came on board at the same time as kind of doing that, but also went back to uni full time and kind of left the corporate world. So then we decided that we were going to kind of specialise in that for good space, and that's what we wanted to do. And I think we wanted to kind of pick up as much work as we could, but the end goal was not necessarily to kind of only do that work, which is what we do now. So we did that, and that was inspired a little bit by B Corp, but we didn't kind of start B Corp from day one. And then we set that up in 2019, did that for less than a year, and then parted ways with some clients. And then COVID came around, and we were like, what have we done? COVID was tough. It was tough for everyone. But we came out the back of it, and we used that downtime to start that B Corp process. And since then we've grown to a team of 5, and it's worked out all right.
What's really interesting there to me is the kind of it sounds basic when you say it out loud, but the synchronicity with your life and what you said about taking the TV away and things like that. That's very interesting to me, because I think we all have our kind of drivers and motivators. Sometimes they can be a little wrong, depending how honest you are with yourself for each of us. I remember stumbling across graphic activism. It sounds really cheesy now, but through Banksy, who just come on the scene when I was studying.
Yeah.
And what he did was open the doors to people like Black Larat and Ken Garland and a lot of other people that had gone before and done for good work. It's a really good way of putting it. But it activated something inside of me that had always been there. Mischievous as a teenager, never never in a really destructive way. I would draw teachers, get in trouble, that kind of thing. Very Dennis the Menace stuff, but it was kind of. But what he did was gave this great vibrancy in life to something that had always been there, and it sounds like a similar thing with you. And I wonder, I think too many people look outside of themselves for answers, particularly in our industry. It's not a criticism, it's very easily done, and I've done it at times, kind of strayed from that path. But I think when you really pay attention to how you feel about the world around you and where you are in your life, the sort of the compasses, however you want to put it, they're there. Are they not? I mean, maybe not for every person, it's all different. But I love those kind of stories that it's this, you paid attention to how you felt and where you were in your life, and it kind of gave you some steer.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know where that comes from necessarily. I think there was probably a multitude of factors in there. I think doing like stuff I hated for a number of years was complete freedom, and it was really important for me that I was that I was happy.
Yeah.
And you're going to spend like 8 hours a day working, minimum, a lot more if you run your own business or work for yourself, a lot more. And so it's really important that you kind of enjoy that. And I think part of the way, the only way to enjoy that is to be really authentic.
Yeah.
And you've got to do that. Because we've got two kind of parts to our business that I would say kind of a USP, and obviously like one of them is that for good stuff. We haven't interviewed anyone that hasn't mentioned ethics in the application, because it's such a key part. You've got to live that kind of day to day.
Yeah,
it's got to be part of who you are, and I find it strange now that I kind of went to work and kind of there was two of me. I think we always kind of put this kind of, there's us that we kind of present to the world, where we want to project who we are, and then there's kind of maybe who we are around our family and friends, and they're slightly different people. But I find it really strange that I would go to work and be someone completely different and kind of hate what I did. But that was the kind of the feeling, you needed a good job and it needed to be stable, and creativity is a little bit kind of, that's a wobbly bridge, and it could go terribly wrong. Well, yeah, okay, but what's the worst that's going to happen?
And where's this? I mean, okay, yeah, you might get pensions and you might get some benefits for employment now, but it's more fragile than it's ever been, in the world. So arguably, you can find sustainability and support in that arena now if you do it true to yourself. But
the whole society is set up with that kind of mentality of like, if you're employed, it's secure, and if you're self-employed, that's harder.
Yeah.
When you apply for a mortgage and things like that, it's kind of like, you're self-employed. It's kind of, we need a lot more evidence. And it's like, do you? Because actually, as a self-employed person, I've got a lot more visibility on the cash flow and the longevity of my business than I ever had when I was employed in another organisation. They could let me go any day, and I didn't know. I was none the wiser. Whereas actually, I can kind of see exactly kind of where I am as self-employed. So you get much better visibility on stuff like that.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Society kind of looks at you and kind of goes, you're on your own, that's dodgy.
But I think that speaks to the historic perception of creativity and in general, doesn't it? Because it's just so much harder to quantify because of the nature of the beast, and that there's only been little glimmers historically, ancient Greece and the likes, not to get too much into the weeds, but where it's been seen as a leader, as this prized thing in our society. And in the talk off, I don't know where this came from, but I described it as that maths is bringing home their first romantic partner. When the door opens, it's art. The family freaks out, and then the trailer's strewn across the hall, and the bedroom door's closed, and there's giggling behind the door. And it's just like, it's funny because I did that, and I didn't hear a single laugh in the crowd, and I'm thinking, just carry on.
They don't get it.
You're not David Brent. You're laughing on the inside. But anyway, but I think that's where that comes from, and it's you can't put it in a spreadsheet. You can't. Like you say, we can see that lay of the land, and you can kind of project a bit more, but when it comes down to facts and figures, that's all people want to see in those markets, and you know, so I think it's always going to be the way to a degree.
Yeah, society relies on design to so we're some of the biggest problem solvers in society, and it's kind of, but it's not really viewed that way. It's kind of, and I think that comes from a number of places as well. I think as an industry, we haven't done ourselves a huge amount of favours. I think a lot of the time, what we do is very process led, and it's editing, and it's having big ideas, and it's being able to kind of, you know, call on life experiences and empathy and things, and take those in and kind of go, where are those factors influencing, in particular, human behaviour around what I want to achieve from this particular problem. But I think it's, as problem solvers, we don't really kind of project that as process. We've pretended for many years that that's magic, and we see, and I don't want to be the kind of the moany designer, but I see it a lot where people are kind of, where they've got like in the branding world, where they've got a particular methodology that really isn't a lot different from anyone else's methodology, and it's trademarked with a name, and it's kind of, and it's like, you come to us, you get this little bit of magic, and we're not going to tell you what it is until you, and what we're going to do is we're going to close the doors when you hire us, going to take your money, because you wouldn't you're not creative, you wouldn't understand what we're doing, and we close the doors, and then we open it and we do a curtain drop and we go, ta-da, and look how clever we are. And I think that we've done that as an industry for a number of years, and I've been part of that. And I think that actually a little bit of kind of transparency between the two as to what we actually do. My parents don't really know what I do. They've got a rough idea, but they don't really kind of, they're not into the kind of the strategy side of it, which is actually where we add a lot of value. Yeah. It's more kind of, what do you do? Like logos and posters and stuff. And it's kind of like, kind of.
He makes images for stuff.
Yeah. It's like adult colouring in. It's kind of like, and I've said that a number of times. Like, I colour stuff in.
This is the reason in my notes here I've got your kind of breakdown, your steps, and I thought that was great for that reason, because it's just, you welcome the client into what they're going to get, and you just drop, because there's good mystique, right? There's Bowie, there's Sudden, the magic. That's music. That's different. I mean, it's in what he did. There was great value to that mystique.
But that's an artist, and you kind of expect that from an artist, right? That's kind of that buy-in.
Smoke and mirrors can be bad when it comes to, like you say, when it just comes to that conversation and that transparency. I think it's great. So in your case here, identify the challenge, define the opportunity, build a strategy, iterate, create, delivery, activation, analysis. Immediately, you make someone feel more comfortable with what they're going to get from you. And it's not that they want to know every step of the process along the way, but with that framework, okay, brilliant. They know what they're doing, so I can trust that they're going to give me the goods. And it's like I mentioned to you earlier, I did a mural for Sips in Salisbury. And that was a great one. I just marched over to the bar on a night out. I'd gone through a long quiet spell. I thought, I need to get assertive again. I've got a bit of energy back. Saw these blank walls in this otherwise colourful craft beer type place. Went over to Jacob at the bar, said, how open are you to discussing our colour walls? Yeah, okay, tell me more. Right, okay, brilliant. That's all I needed to know. I'll come in next Tuesday for a pint at lunchtime. We'll have a conversation. And one of the first things I did with Jacob was kind of like, right, let me, show you the style, let me sketch up, let me show you how I envision it on the walls. And then I bring him in on the process, and it takes away the nerves as an owner of a place who's got to cover these big dominant walls. If I get that wrong, it's going to look terrible on his business. So, but by bringing him in and having that rounded conversation, we both just felt great. The energy was flowing, and I think, what's the point in being all, like you say, putting something on it that doesn't need to be there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's 100% the way my brain works. I think you're exactly right. Hats off to anyone that can kind of do that, and I think there's maybe there's the experience there and the credibility that's been built up by big agencies over the years and big projects to kind of back up these statements of, they know what they're doing. It's not that they're kind of, it's not smoke and mirrors and it's all pretend. It's just, for me, over my career, I've found it, I'm not the kind of curtain drop kind of, here it is, that makes me really nervous, and for a number of reasons, because I've been in that situation where we've done that, and like someone goes, I don't like it, and I'm like, and then it's like, okay, what do I do about that? Whereas actually, if you start early and you bring those people on board and you help people to understand, and this is why this process is so important, like identifying where that particular challenge is and where's the value in solving that. Get everyone on board with that to start with. Where's the opportunity? And where's the value in solving that opportunity? Get everyone kind of aligned as to, yes, there's value in doing that. So let's solve it. Okay, now how are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And then we bring them through that process as well. So we get everyone kind of on board. We try and limit the amount of people kind of feeding in, but everyone's working towards a common goal, you know, and that's why we're strategically focused, because I really believe that this is the way to do it. And get everyone aligned on that, and then you start kind of introducing, you know, the more visual side to it, and you can justify everything. And I say to the team here, like, I want you to be able to justify everything that's kind of on that page, even if that justification is, well, it looks nice, doesn't it? But there needs to be a reason why that's a justification.
Yeah.
And what, you know, where's the value in it just looking nice? And I think if you carry people through that process and you bring them along, you don't get the big curtain drop at the end. So it's not such a massive unveiling. In fact, like, you get to a point where you launch a brand and people are probably sick and tired of seeing it for the last like 9 months of the process. But what it does do is it stops like people turning around and going, I don't like that. I don't like that colour.
Yeah.
Well, they understand why it's that colour in the first place. So I think that's critical to that process.
And also it's shared satisfaction, because by being a part of the process for their business, it's like they get some ownership too.
Yeah.
And you're all there. And then, but does that not go the other way? Because, you know, in that kind of bohemian mindset where you go, oh, but if there is mystique and everything else, surely it gives you more creative license because you've gone through the right steps and you're all on board, you're all up to a level. So therefore, when it comes to the real, you know, the juicy creative ideas, surely it gives them freedom then. Because of that.
Yeah, maybe. I think that we'll always try and push people. I'd rather be reined back than pushed forwards. And when it's very rare that we kind of go forward and kind of go, here's one idea, this is the right idea. Sometimes it is, but by that point you've had conversations with people. They really kind of understand that you really get them, even though you don't work as part of that company. You feel kind of part of that team because you really understand what's going on. And I think that's easier to kind of get buy-in of like, and ultimately I don't want to kind of force someone to do something that's massively outside their comfort zone.
Of course.
Because you need people to believe in what you're doing. And by bringing them on that journey, I think this helps, is at some point you've got to hand it over as a creative, and it's kind of like, you know, I've nurtured this thing for a while and now I'm giving it away, and you've got to look after it. And we've all seen kind of what can happen when you hand something over and then you step away. But I think if you get people that are on board with it and they really believe in it, then they're the brand ambassadors. No one's going to sell that. Like, I'm not going to be in 6 months' time when I'm not getting paid for that job anymore. I'm not going back going, you know, you should try this and you should do that, and this is how to drive your brand forward. Have you thought about this?
Yeah.
But so I think that you need that kind of engagement to really get that championing of that brand internally.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and that belief is key at every stage, like you say, of the job, but also just, I think the afterlife is critical too, and gives it the best chance. So early on, how quickly did you sort of outwardly project your desire to do work for the do good space? And, you know, did you actively seek work? Was it a case of one job will lead to another? How did yours kind of finish?
So when we set up Pretty Clever, that was I guess the kind of defining moment. April 2019, we were like, right, okay, we want to do work in this space. That's where we're going to focus. There was a time where in COVID where cash flow wasn't great. and I'd probably get told off by my wife for oversharing. But I came within about 30 days of losing the business, and nothing makes you sit up and pay attention like that. And there was a point just before that where we'd been offered the introduction to a potential quite large project, certainly large by our standards. And there was nothing wrong with it. They certainly weren't doing any harm in the world. There's certain conversations that we won't even have with people. They were just selling a product that was quite nice, but it wasn't actively trying to change the world. And I turned it down, and I thought I was going to live to regret it. We haven't, luckily, but I think that is that's a really nice defining moment for us, where we're kind of like, no, we stick to it. So there's that one. There's another one which my wife is really, really proud about, and that was after year one. So we'd gone into COVID, and we turned away a couple of clients, and we thought, we're going to operate in this space and it's all going to be good. And it wasn't great to start with. And we'd just gone we're about a month into lockdown of the end of our financial year. And we'd made a profit in year one, not a big profit. And from day one, I said, I want to give 10% of our profits away to charity. And we came to that end of that year, and we sat down and we went through the finances. And Kate was like, is this something that you want to do? I know it is what you want to do, but in terms of, we haven't really got any work coming in, and we need that money. Do you still want to do it? And I was like, yes. And she's like, even now, she's like, that's incredible like moment in our history where it makes her really proud that we kind of did that, and we decided to do that. And so I think those kind of moments are the ones where we've gone, do you know what? That's who we are, and that's what we want to do. We have to be really active about finding work. We're not a big agency. We're quite young, probably lost a couple of years to COVID, realistically. People don't know who we are. I'm under no illusion that we're kind of, anything that anyone's ever heard of. We're trying to change that. And so we have to be really proactive. And we were in that quiet time as well during COVID. And I reached out to a number of companies, particularly B Corp companies, and said, look, this is our aspiration. We love you guys. There was nothing else apart from that. Do you fancy a coffee? We've got some time. And they were amazing. Everyone had time, but still, in terms of like how I've done business in the past, that felt significantly different. It felt like people were like, oh, you want to do something nice. That's great. And so do we. Let's have a chat about that. And we chatted to loads of people. We made loads of friends, and people were like really encouraging and really helpful, and gave us loads of advice around B Corp, and and kind of helped us to really see that that's definitely what we want to do.
Yeah, and I've never found anything to the contrary with this industry, really. By and large, of course, you get exceptions, but whether it was moving back to Manchester or just, there's been times like during this recent quiet malaise where, Simon Dixon in particular from Dixon Baxi was wonderful, very lovely guy. He was very passionate about design, constantly sharing and feeding back to the industry, particularly young people up and coming. And I've always found that a lovely ecosystem in our world, because I think by and large people are quite grateful to be doing this thing that they would otherwise be doing as a hobby. Yeah. And I'm always happy to, I laughed, I said to somebody recently, maybe I'm wrong and maybe it does happen, but I just can't imagine one dentist reaching out to another dentist for a coffee because they're both dentists. It's just like, it seems weird to me, but
there's got to be the old dental conference and stuff, surely, right?
But in terms of off the cuff, whenever I've moved anywhere new, I've been very quick to find local talent and just go, I'm new to town, I'm also doing what you do you want a brew? And people don't see it as weird at all. It's kind of, and that's a lovely thing. So to hear on that level is great also. And it's also, I think it's in terms of, so there's mystique on that level in terms of the job process, but also whenever I've been vulnerable enough to share the real stories and the struggles, people love that, because I think there is a lot of pretense and a lot of, you said, people don't know who we are. It's like, I mean, so what to a degree? Okay, when it comes to finding work, that's quite important, okay, but that's different. But there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that it's probably going to be encouraging to a lot of people to hear that you do have to drive on that level to find the work, because...
We really do. We really have to be proactive on it. But it's, it's part of the job. And I think that when you do that, I get approached a lot about new business, and it's done in a way. I was laughing because I've had a couple of emails recently about, like, they approach you and it's, this is what we do, and we've discovered this about you, but you do this, and this isn't very good, is it? But we can help you with that. And that's kind of like, that for me feels really weird as a first kind of introduction to kind of go to someone. It's like walking up to someone in the street, shaking their hand and going, I don't like what you're wearing, but I could probably help you with that if you give me a bit of your time and your money. And it's, and for me, that's just really weird. Whereas actually, if that's what you want to do, at least become friends with that person. But people don't want to invest in that kind of long-term like commitment to kind of new business.
Yeah. And
it's something that we have to do. We do on a regular basis and try and make friends and try and be embedded. And we're not the best at it, but I like to think we kind of approach it on a level first of, like, wooing that person into kind of going and finding out if they're right for us.
Yeah.
Because not everyone's right for us. We work in, I'd say we're quite challenging. We're very strategic. Some people just want to come in and go, we need this, please do this. And that's probably not us.
Yeah.
So it's about kind of finding that harmonious relationship. So it's worth the investment.
Absolutely. And I've, even now 15 years in, I've switched tracks recently in that regard, from what was always, a very nice and polite introduction, but kind of going, I'm an illustrator, this is what I do, I'd love to be able to bring something to the table. But actually I've started now leading with questions about the person's role. I want to find out who the art director is, what they're doing, what their day-to-day looks like, and who their clients are, so that I can then kind of go, okay, well, now this is what I do, and this portion of my work might appeal to what you do, and let's have a conversation about that, because at the end of the day, it's quite a personal industry in that regard, and I think it's good to learn about who you're approaching. Like you said, that's a really good analogy of the person in the street. I love the idea of that.
Yeah, I want to see it happen, actually. I think it's like so much of our work revolves around empathy.
Yeah.
And it takes time. You'll never know, and we always say this, when people kind of go, why, like, it's almost like an eye roll of like, oh, why do you need an onboarding workshop? Why do you need kind of this? And we're honest about it, because we'll never know you like you know you, but we need to try, and we need to get up to speed as quickly as possible, because we need to understand what it's like to be you and to be your customers in order for us to be able to deliver the best work.
Yeah. And
you only get that from kind of really good relationships where people are honest, where they're prepared to talk about the things that are a bit shit as well as the stuff that's great. So I think that those relationships are really, really important to kind of to curate and kind of and build.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting. I have a local friend who's recently diagnosed with autism, and he's got this very kind of, he loves to find the humour in that, because he's answered a lot of questions about his life and the way he is, and he's got this amazingly dry sense of humour, which is fantastic. And he talked about that recently, and he said, I've had to train myself to adhere to a few social norms because I was too brutal prior to learning about this. But he said, I don't want to, when people turn up and it's like, oh, so who are you, what do you do? He's like, no, he said, where do you stand on religion?
Yes, straight in.
I just love that, the idea
of the whole room shut down.
Yeah,
like,
someone arriving and going, my name's is like, no, where do you stand on religion?
Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of the projects, because there's something that really jumped out at me, which I thought was fantastic. And I love the Mel wireframed project. Yeah. And what struck me about a lot of your work, and particularly the case studies, is the complexity of it.
Yeah. So we So I'll talk a little bit about kind of how we're set up, and then that might kind of help with some of the projects. So the type of agency that I'm trying to build is that we don't employ very specific skill sets. What we do is we employ a group of people that are very good at solving problems through design. And that is very strategic focused. And yes, those people have gone to university and studied illustration or graphic design or whatever they've studied, or not in my case. And they've got skills that they can kind of bring to the table. But actually the fundamentals is kind of going, how do I help this client understand what that challenge is? And again, talking about the value in solving that. And then how do we go about that? And how do we pull on kind of real world experiences and other things that aren't design focused in order to kind of solve those? So we are quite good at solving complex stuff, which is why people kind of come to us and ask us to do certain things. So Mel's a really good example. So we met them in lockdown. They're another B Corp, and they were one of the people that actually really championed us going for it. Really, really lovely people. Company called 58. They work in anti-modern slavery, human trafficking stuff. Really heavy. Until very recently, they were the highest scoring B Corp in the UK. I mean, these people they're amazing, amazing people. And they approached us and said, basically, we've got this idea, and we've got a dev team, but we don't really know how to kind of take this idea of what we want to do and the steps that we need to kind of go through and build it. For us, that's perfect. So we don't do in-house development. We don't, because we're so small, we can only really afford to employ someone that codes in one language. If a client comes to us and goes, we need something digital, a website, an app, whatever that is, we're going to sell them that solution no matter what, because I've got bills to pay. So, okay, we're going to build you this. And that's not always the right solution for everyone. Actually, when we've thought about it and gone through a process, they might be better off using something else. So we've got a kind of series of kind of development partners and things like that. And we work with a few people that have got in-house development or their own development partner. And where we kind of sit in that analogy, the one that the way that I explain it to people is, if you want a new house, you can go direct to a builder, and that builder can build you a house. And they might build you a very good house, but they might not ask you some of the questions that might help you have a better designed house. Mm-hmm. What you might do is you might go to an architect, and they'll design that house, and then they'll work with a builder that is right for the plans that they've developed for your needs, and then work with them to kind of build it. That's us. We're the architect in those jobs. So they came to us and said, can you help us? And so we went through a very long process of going, actually what we need to do is we need to kind of step back and take what you've got, because they had a kind of basic working wireframe of an app, extract all that stuff and kind of work through this process of kind of building that out. Who are the people that are going to use it? How, taking on into account. And the people that used it were nuns in India. So it's a real niche group of individuals that it's kind of to try and kind of get in that kind of empathy zone of these people. And what we found is actually technology was not necessarily the easiest thing for people to use. So we had this kind of acronym of MEL, and then we developed a kind of character around that in order to kind of help, almost a bit like the kind of Microsoft paperclip in terms of helping them through that journey, as well as doing kind of, where does information sit, what makes sense to kind of put where on what page and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think there's a really important ripple effect from that, and I think it's right now, look at this. I mean, the speed of technology is mind-blowing for me. I've just turned 40, and here we are with Chat GPT and Midjourney, earth shakers really in the art world and industry. And so, God, my poor dad, who's 68, just turned 68, and he uses eBay and he can use his email kind of thing. But we have to be careful, don't we, in society, about leaving large swathes of people behind or eliminating people, even in things as simple as voting.
Yeah,
registering to vote. Fundamental democratic plays. So really, when you look at work like that and how crucial design is to accessibility and to inclusivity, particularly in that realm, in human trafficking and the likes, it's a major project, and then speaks to the power of it.
So we've worked with them on a number of different projects. They also do another app, which is widely available, called Just Good Work, which is available to migrant workers that are travelling from one country to another country, and they provide the right information and some safeguarding around that, and that isn't always the easiest thing to do because there's legal things that need to happen, but then those lines are sometimes blurred, so it's kind of like, how do you give someone the right advice, but also kind of say to them, if you don't allow things to bend and flex slightly, then you probably won't get a job. So it's kind of like, no, you shouldn't be paying fees to these people because legally you're not supposed to. If you don't pay any fees to these people, you won't get a job.
Right.
Kind of. Yeah. So it's kind of like, how much is taking the piss? So it's, but they can't really say that. They have to kind of put the legal framework in place. So it's a really, really difficult thing to communicate. And then we worked on a project with them recently because they came to us and they said, we've got this app and it works. We've got a particular challenge. We've got a group of people that are going from Uttar Pradesh in India to the Middle East, and adult literacy is low. So we've got an app that contains loads of text, and we're worried that people aren't going to be able to read it. So what can we do to solve that? So then we did some research around the technology challenges around that. And our go-to kind of thing was like, it's India, the Wi-Fi is going to be, and the internet's going to be shit. And that's a wrong assumption on our part, and so we need to kind of factor that in when we're kind of, because the easiest solution is video, audio.
Yeah.
So we need to integrate that somehow. That's an easy win. But how do we solve the problem? The internet's not going to be very good, so it all needs to kind of go into the app. That's the initial assumption, but we need to understand that. And then we went through a period of kind of speaking to people and understanding on the ground. Actually, we found out that internet in India is magnificent, and it's the cheapest in the world.
Yeah.
So it's abundant, but actually the technology is not that great. So people are using really old phones. So we found that they quite often have to delete an app in order to install a newer one, because old phones, lower space, bigger apps.
Sounds like me, to be honest.
And if all that content's loaded into the app, it's going to be really big. So we were like, actually, if there's access to internet and things like that, and that's not the barrier, do we need to kind of pull that from somewhere else? It's not preloaded into the app, it's pulling it through. So there was like things like that, like problems that we solved.
And what does that look like from a studio perspective? Because I was browsing the website, part of the research, and it's always nice to see, kind of wall boards and reference. Actually, saw one of my own pieces on that, which was a lovely surprise. The run over a cat poster.
Yeah.
But do you get into a physical environment and you've got a nice space to work in here? Is it kind of, you get off screens to begin with and have what does that mean? Like, give us some insight into that process as a team.
So I think when I was having not gone through the creative university system, I managed to I worked down here for a little bit, and it was kind of like, I thought, I trained myself how to use these packages, and that makes me a graphic designer. And there was a big gap in my knowledge. I managed to get a job in London with an agency. It was hard to get a job in London, and I had a really honest conversation with this lady, and she was like, with a recruitment agency, I was like, why am I not getting in interviews? And she was really blunt, but I like that. And she was like, everyone's putting your CV in the bin because I think it's shit. Like, you haven't got a graphic design degree, you haven't really worked for anyone of note. Yeah. You've got limited experience, and and so I was like, okay, great. How do I solve that? And so I started kind of sending out stuff, offering people to kind of to work for free. I think enthusiasm goes a long way. So I was like, I'll work for free. If I'm no good, then you can bin me. One person took me up on that. Well, the first person that took me up on it, I ended up getting a job with, and I stayed with them for nearly 5 years. That's an agency called Cog Design, and the creative director there, Michael, obviously saw there was potential, but saw where there was a gap in terms of and was really, really keen in terms of getting me off a computer. I remember a project came in once and we were pitching these kind of ideas, and one of them was going to be around this kind of diorama, and I was like, oh, I can create that in Photoshop and stuff like that. And he was like, what are you doing? He's like, go and make it and photograph it. And there was lots of stuff like that. So that kind of that really helped me understand the value of getting away from a computer. And that's something that I think that we need to do a lot of, and I try and do here. I don't like printing loads of stuff out all the time for the sake of it. I do think we achieve, and there's things like Miro and stuff, but we do still try and get us in a meeting room and get it up on the big screen and get everyone kind of contributing to that centrally. Sometimes we don't use screens at all, and we kind of go, this is the idea, go in the meeting room, close the doors, here's some paper, here's some Sharpies. I want ideas. I don't want finished products at this stage. So that is the kind of early part of that process. It's really important for us to kind of step away and to pull on real world experiences, something that's not, and it's something that I'm trying to instill in everyone at the moment, where we don't just need to look at other graphic design examples. In fact, that's probably the last thing we need to do.
That's how you feed AI.
Yeah. And actually we need to work out, okay, what do we want to achieve? How do we need to make, if it's human-centered, which the majority of the time it is, how do we need to make that person feel? Or what experience do we want that person to have? And where else in the world do they experience that
crucial
thing? That's empathy. That's understanding kind of different cultures and different things and influences as to, and then we use that as an input. all of those things we've noticed a similar colour. Well, that colour must kind of then invoke that kind of reaction from that human being. Let's use that because it makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, like, your work for Cancha was great too. A great example. Outdoor backpacks, durability, and you know, and multi-use. It's just, you can, of course, you can do that entirely through a screen, but you probably shouldn't. Not when something's out there and people, you know, this is a product to use in the wild, and you have to get into, like you said about, you can't know that person like that person knows themselves. Of course you can't, but you have to try and live a modicum of their life and just get a taste of what, you know, where the thing's going to live in the real world. And I think you have to vary the processes and the research and the inspiration. Again, to reference Simon and then Dixon Baxi, they've recently done some amazing work for football clubs, so for Everton and AC Milan, full rebrands. But we talked in depth about, you know, he talked about taking the staff out to games in the San Siro and hearing the sounds of the ultras stomping and the flares in the crowd, and why that was crucial to feed all that into the process of understanding what it meant. And that was in response to me asking about that being something of a poison chalice, designing for a football club, because it's a very partisan audience and you're always going to upset a few of them. But Simon believed it didn't have to be the case. If you did your due diligence and you were respectful enough to go and live that life or a portion of it, then ultimately it lived in the work. And he put it in a really beautiful way by saying, you know, I can never and should never have the liberty of whispering over that fan's shoulder about, oh, he chose that colour palette or that line weight, because I should never have that. But he believed that they, all the same, all that process and that research would resonate and would come through the final work in some way, whether it was subconscious or. And I thought that was, you know, magic. And I think you have to get there by, you know, doing that and going different roads to get there.
I think experiencing it directly. I mean, I'd love a budget that would allow us to kind of go and spend time being customers and things like that. I mean, I've got a good relationship with a very good, my favourite, like, branding agency in London, and seeing the kind of stuff that they do, where they go in, they did some work for Uber Eats, and they went and kind of became delivery drivers and ordered like food and things like that. And it's doing that stuff and living and breathing it to really kind of understand, okay, where are the challenges around that? What are we solving? Do we want to make it look nice and for everyone to kind of go, isn't that pretty? Yes. Is it going to get panned on like lots of creative blogs where people project really subjective opinions? Probably, because that's part of the process. But actually, in terms of doing a good job, really kind of understanding kind of what it's like to be them.
Yeah, and like you say, the budget thing, it all comes into it, doesn't it? And I know Simon and Pava have got many stories of when it was just them two starting out, when they had to be out there doing all the legwork. So it's that kind of, I think it's a time thing, isn't it, and experience. But, I think there's ways you can filter that down to wherever you are and be still, take the time to do that. So, in terms of, you talked about that, I think it was on the website, you talked about the importance of spending time with the client and right from early on in the process of a job. Do you price, for a really sort of blunt question, but do you price that into a project fee? Because I'm thinking just from personal perspective, there are many jobs where I would have loved to have spent a lot longer, living, like you said, living that life and getting more into that side of things. The reality was different. I got maybe 5 days and I'm in my little garden studio and I've got young twins. So that's my personal circumstance. But is that something you factor into a kind of project budget? And if so, how do you express that to the client? Or I don't know, is it?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier about the kind of onboarding thing and kind of why do we need to spend money on that? And it's kind of helping people understand where the value in that is. And that's not easy. I think if you have got a really big agency and there's bigger budgets and things like that, then maybe that's kind of you can integrate that more into it. We have to work on quite lean budgets. Money's like pricing and stuff for things is always really difficult and more to the point of showing people where the value is. The biggest challenge is like project management. I think it's kind of getting, this is what we're going to charge for project management. We're really clear up front from day one. We charge for our time, not our output. So you're not paying a fixed price to have something. We're going to give you a price of how long we think it will be to do a good job on this, and we will track it for you, and we will give you regular updates. And if everything goes how we expect it to go and you expect it to go, that's where we're going to end up, roughly. Do we overinvest in projects all the time?
Yeah,
massively. I mean, because we track all our time, some of the things I look at and I'm just like, wouldn't it be great if we got paid for all of that? We'd earn a lot more money as a studio and things would be a lot better. But it's not. But I do think it's really important to kind of go, this is the value of doing that. We had a recent meeting with a potential new client and we were going to spend the day or a few hours, but a day by the time we travelled to London and travelled back, a few hours with them kind of working out. They had a project in mind and said, this is what we want to do. And we were like, well, we kind of want to understand a little bit more about you and a little bit more about this project. And you might be right. You probably are right. We don't want to kind of assume that you're wrong, but we really want to understand as to where is that the right way to solve that problem. And we were like, to do that and to come spend a day with you to do that, we're going to charge you for that. And that sets it. And they were like, oh, okay. And we were like, this is what we'll do afterwards. We'll write it up and we'll send it back to you. And I think that kind of that playback to people is really vital. And explaining the process and being kind of open and honest with people about where the value in doing that is. So you want us to kind of do stuff, we're going to solve a problem. We need to kind of really understand what that problem is. Yeah.
And there's a great level of integrity there as well, because the next agency might just go, yeah, we can do that, of course we can do that, take it on, maybe not do the best job or maybe not be the right fit. I think there's a lovely integrity to that.
You really find out who values design when you do that.
I was going to say that must act as a bit of a gatekeeper.
Yeah, it does. And it's not to say that we wouldn't work with people that refuse to do that and go, this is just what we need. We just need you to do it.
Yeah.
But I want the work to be fulfilling for us, and as thinkers about that, that's not the most rewarding work. But we will do that stuff because it's bread and butter.
Of course, the compromise is essential somewhere.
But in terms of kind of when you send something out to someone and you put like, this is the kind of immersion phase, and we're going to do this and this and this. And the stuff that you think we're doing, we're not doing that until stage 4, that kind of colouring in, and we're going to show you some pretty pictures and stuff like that and get you really excited about that. We're going to do all this stuff first, and that's going to be quite a lot of budget. When you get someone that kind of goes, yeah, that sounds great, you're just, it's a game changer, because you're like, you really see where we're going to add value as an agency.
Yeah.
We're not just artworking something that you need. We're solving particular challenges.
It's a great feeling, isn't it? I've had it a few times recently where, I've been doing this thing long enough now, and I do a lot of writing as well, fiction and non-fiction. People have started to bring that in. And that's such a great post, because the only thing I'm trained to do is the illustration, the illustration degree. But it's like you said about hiring people that are creative thinkers and problem solvers, and that's always been the big attraction to this industry for me, is the thinking and the ideas and the relationships and everything else. So I'll provide you with some powerful artwork, because that's what I do and that's what it says in the tin. But when people say to me, well, you do that podcast, would you like to be a part of the interviewing process to get the research? Yes, that's where I want to be. I want to bring in that rounded sphere of creativity, because I can do so much more than draw, and it's like, I agree completely. It's an incredible feeling.
And I think creative people, I'm not sure I agree with that term as a whole, but people that work within the creative industry or have found that kind of niche,
creativity,
are quite often really curious people. We're quite nosy, so it's kind of, to be involved in that process and to kind of find out and to learn stuff is really interesting. So it does really kind of excite me to kind of, that's not. When we work with clients, a good example is like when we work with clients and we talk about websites, and they're like, when you start, we break it down into process of kind of what we do each stage. And they're like, when you start designing the website, and they're talking about the stage where we're talking about visuals, where we're kind of showing, and I'm like, no. By the time we get to that point, the website is designed. We've worked out all the hierarchy of information, like all the UX, all the kind of the user groups and the user journeys and all of that stuff. We've done all that work. That's the design, and this is the kind of the visual side of it, which you've probably got a framework for in place already. We don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel. We want to kind of lean on that and some of the thinking that we've done already to kind of inform the kind of the visual look and feel. But a lot of that work's like the design work is done, but it always makes me kind of smile when people go, when we do the design stuff, because that's the stuff that they kind of see as like,
the organic stuff that you did, and that was a good example of that, of not reinventing the wheel and working with an existing set of existing visual identity. And also the green sphere stuff, like that, I loved the subtlety in that project. So I mean, could you give us just a little insight into that project?
So that was a digital project, and they approached us about a website that they needed to update, and they were quite hands-on with that stuff. That was less kind of, I'd say, less thinking led, and they were more prescriptive around kind of this is the feeling that we really want to get out of it. Try these images, and they kind of pointed us down this kind of NASA route, and we were a bit like, it's a bit kind of but then we found some really strong imagery around that, and it was kind of about kind of breaking stuff up and understanding, okay, where do people need to get to really quickly, and kind of having just that kind of simplified kind of landing page of like, here's the main bit that you might want to read about, and then here's some kind of menu items that are kind of distilled, and then nothing really kind of below the fold on that stuff, and then people kind of can choose from that particular point where they want to go.
But again, that's the necessity of compromise to a degree, and it's not always a bad thing, is it? Sometimes you just have to go, okay, well, there's the project we talked about there, where it's really complex and it's bottom up, but then sometimes to grab something and just come in at a certain point and remove ego from that is really important.
And I think that was a very kind of portfolio led site and they had some content, and it's a really good example of like someone coming to us, and we always try and demand kind of 90% finished content up front before we go down a digital project, because we're building it for the content, and they're a good example of kind of like, we've got content.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of, okay, how do we reorder that content? Do we need to reorder that content? Let's look at the kind of where it naturally sits and kind of breaking that down into a fairly kind of a decent user experience.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah, that's really interesting. So moving forward, you had this very organic journey into where you are. Does that remain? As in, do you plan? Is it a case of the focus is on doing the great work for the right people, and then any kind of growth will come as a result of that, or do you have a sort of plan and targets as to growing as an agency or anything like that?
A bit of both, really. So we have grown organically. We've never taken investment. I don't really want to go down that route. I don't think we need to go down that route. We've got a plan to grow to 12. Like a financial plan to grow to 12. I've got a mentor that came about from me reaching out to someone a couple of years ago. He runs Koto, still founder of Koto in London, and I reached out to it because they're an agency that I've always looked up to as like, they're really, really good at storytelling and kind of immersing, and that immersion kind of stuff that we talk about, that really shows in their work. They're really, really good at kind of visually kind of telling a story of a brand, and that's something that I've really aspired to. And I reached out to him maybe a couple of years ago and said, I want to grow an agency. I've started. I always shit myself when I get to a point. These are my exact words to him. I've never met him. Send him a thing on Instagram. I always shit myself when I get to a point where I have to hire someone. Can I pinch an hour of your time? And he was really good and said yes. He actually said yes if you buy me a bottle of red wine and a decent bottle of red. And I was like, and I don't know whether, and we're still, and I spoke to him about kind of for an hour, and we parted ways, and we've carried on that conversation, and he's been really, really good to me. It's James Greenfield, and I don't know whether it's because I bought him a really, really nice bottle of red wine, or whether just because we got on quite well. So I talked to him quite a lot about stuff, and he gave me a really, really good piece of advice that stuck. And he was like, what's your aspirations? And I was like, I don't really kind of know. I don't really want anything kind of your size, because that's terrifying. That's multiple countries and a lot of staff. But never say never. And he gave me a really, really good piece of advice, and he was like, once you get to 12, once you get over 12, the dynamic changes. He was like, once you get to a point where you can't sit everyone around one table, then the dynamic of that business really changes. So that's why we've got a plan to kind of get to 12, and then we'll kind of see where we are. Have we got a time limit on that? No. Would I like to get to that point quickly? Yeah. If there's enough work to do that. And I think that we're in a space that's growing rapidly in terms of the for good space, but we do have to be really proactive about getting that. And because we are so selective on clients, it's not, if we're turning away work, I'd rather do that and grow slowly than just take everything and grow really big and kind of lose sight of why we set up in the first place.
Yeah, because there'd be a lot of resentment coming there, wouldn't it? And it's like you say, you took some big risks there and some ballsy decisions, to stay on track. At times when I
don't know if they're ballsy or stupid, but it's all right. We're still here.
I suppose it depends how it turns out. But I think you're right, and I was going to ask you that to kind of wrap up. Do you feel optimistic? Do you feel good? Because I think I talked to Katie Klenchensky, who is the founder, creative director of Smack Studios in New York, and they're in a similar sphere. You know, they're trying to do work for good and help brands who want to do good to get better at doing that. So slightly different model, but very interesting work. And she was talking about some of the statistics, and I think it was something like some surveys have shown that 69% of people are willing to invest their money in brands who they perceive to be doing things right and sustainable, and that's growing. Yep. You're looking at the different demographics of boomers, it's like just under 50%. Younger people, we're getting up into the high 80s now.
Yep.
And that's really exciting. For someone like me who's been down a few rabbit holes about things like the climate crisis and a lot of ethical things, these things are important to see along the way because there's so much toxic headlines and the rest of it out there. So do you feel good? And that's encouraging to hear that it's rapidly growing.
Yeah.
So do you feel good, optimistic moving forward?
So it's rapidly growing for a number of reasons. And one, because people want change, and we don't really have a choice. That's kind of like you change or that's it. But also, the cynic in me says it's changing because there's a money shift happening. And things like renewable energy, like wind turbines and things, are getting to the point where they're producing energy at a lower pound per kilowatt than you can get from like fossil fuels. So this kind of big switch across isn't always driven by the will to do good. It's financially led. The thing to understand is it doesn't really matter why things are changing. It just matters that they are changing.
Yeah.
When we first started the company, I drew a line kind of like just literally on a post-it note with a Sharpie. It was just a line, and I've still got it kicking around the studio somewhere because I look at it every now and then, and it's like I labelled activist at one end, and then at the other end I wrote doesn't give a shit, and I was like, where do we sit on that line? And we're not the activists. There's studios out there that will be going to every protest, and fair play, because that's amazing to be able to do that. And protesting and really kind of pushing hard. I sometimes call it the optimistic activist. And that is our kind of activism, that optimism in that space is like, we are incredibly resourceful as a species, as human beings. And I think that we will overcome whatever is thrown at us. We need to be doing that faster than what we're doing it at the moment. In terms of, do I feel good about it? It's really mixed. You see a lot of people kind of like using this movement that's happening to kind of for some sort of gain, where they're kind of like, we're doing this and we're part of this movement too, and you're clearly not, and that's okay.
Yeah,
you're making a choice, but don't dress it up to be something it's not. In terms of what we do, I think it can be overwhelming. I think it can be, we've had kind of discussions as a team where we're kind of, because we're constantly embedded in that area, we read so much about it, we see kind of like, but what is really hopeful is there's so many people doing like good things off the back of it, or that want change. I mean, the B Corp movement's just absolutely like gone through the ceiling in the last few years here, and that's because people want to do stuff in a better way. They want less negative impact on the planet. So it can be overwhelming. It can be used by people to dress something up to be what it's not. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter why things change. It just matters that they do change, and they are changing. Yeah. So yeah, I'm really hopeful about the future, and I think there's an element of optimism that comes through in our work. Yeah. There's definitely it errs on the side of kind of like positivity.
Very much so. It's tangible. Before we even met, that came through to me. So yeah, hats off. And
thanks.
It's very inspiring to see, and helps to get through the rougher days. So that's really good. Yeah. And if all else fails, my fiction can get pretty dark, so that's good. But it's interesting. I don't know if you heard the episode with Dan Kieran. If not, it's well worth a listen. Dan founded Unbound publisher 10 years ago, crowdfunded publisher, and Dan's just incredibly wise guy, and he lives on the next street from me. He was another dog walking connection. But when he was on the show, he talked about how, because one of his books was called I Fought the Law, and he was kind of looking at democracy in the UK political system. Spent a year, I think maybe 2 years, talking to a lot of people in that area, and came away with the conclusion that it was going to have to be business that changed things, because there were just so many party lines to be toed, and so much, for want of a better word, I guess, corruption going on, personal agenda, careerists. But then it was going to have to be business that took the lead and started to make force change, because we, again, like you said, we have to.
That's how we're set up.
That lot are not doing it, then we have to make them, because we feed them, particularly businesses. Let's face it, that's who they're in it for. So it's kind of like, if those guys want it, then what choice do you give them?
And I think that's how we're set up. That's how we're that's the framework that exists. So do we burn it to the ground and start again? I'm not I know that some people think that is the only way to do it. Do we do that? I'm not. I think there's probably a better way of doing it, in that we leverage the system that we've got, and we change it to work in our favour. And business is exactly that. We need we all need to earn a salary. We all need to not everyone can afford to do things just from the goodness of their heart. So but can we do things better? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Echo that completely. The majority of my career, I've been fortunate enough to not do too much that's gave me night sweats, but there is the odd client where I have to put a lens over that and sort of look in the mirror, and only when it's absolutely necessary to keep paying that mortgage and everything. But I fight very hard to push my career in a direction where I don't have to do that, and I think we all do. I think that speaks to that optimism, so it's great to hear.
Do you think that's changed for you over the years, in terms of now there's certainly more publicity around we need to change? Do you think your approach to work over recent years has notably changed in terms of the way you look at it and scrutinise it, as to whether you're more comfortable doing?
It's for the longest time I didn't really have too much to worry about really in that regard. I think that the nature of my work brought in sort of nice, youthful, energetic clients, and that's what was lovely. A couple of bigger ones recently where I've had to look at it and had to have some conversations with my wife to go, can I do this? Yeah, okay, I need this financially, but then it's the bigger picture as well, because I have to sort of think, well, okay, if that's going to finance me moving quicker to a space where I can be completely pure, then okay, you have to be realistic about that in the system in which we live. Till that collapses, then that's the reality. So, but yes, I've certainly now as a father, 2 young children, the world being like it is, very much I have to be able to get out of bed in the morning and feel good about where I am. And someone who wrote their dissertation on graphic activism and was very, very inspired by a lot of benevolent work. Of course, it's the high majority percentage has to be good stuff. Stuff that I see as being additive to people's lives and not destructive. Again, it's all nuanced, but I'm very, very, very. I do hold myself to high account on that, because you only live once to our knowledge. So I don't want to be out the back door and go, look what a mess I've left. Yeah. Well, I think that covers absolutely everything, unless there's anything else you want to shout about moving forward. But I think we covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
It's been great to chat.
Yeah.
No, lastly, where can people find your work?
So we're at prettycleverstudio.com, or we're on Instagram as, I should get this right, Pretty Clever Studio. And that's, so they'll find more of us there.
Awesome. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you much for your time.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you ever so much to John for taking the time out of a busy schedule with Pretty Clever. Do go and check them out. They're brilliant. They're a great agency. Doing lots of good work and lots of complex work. We talked about that on the show, and I hope you took something from it, but the complexity of some of their projects and the ambition, very, very impressive stuff. If you enjoyed it, let me know at Ben Talon or at Ben Talon Pod. No, tell a lie, I've changed it. Or at Creative Condition _ on the social, on Twitter and Instagram. Truth be told, I'm on at Ben Talon a lot more. I'm trying to trim down my social use and get in the headspace for creativity a lot more. You might have noticed, I'm still there, but you can email me also if you want a quicker response at hello@bentalon.com. I hope things are good with you guys. I hope you're staying afloat. I hope you're staying mentally well, because it's tough out there, as I mentioned, particularly with the state of things climate-wise at the minute, and the heat waves and the floods we're getting around the world. Let's hope we can play our part in this. Stay positive, stay inspired. Thank you for checking in. A big thank you to the supporters of the show, illustrationx.com, for all their illustration and animation portfolios. Thank you for listening, guys. It really does mean a lot. Have an awesome week. See you later.